Mm.
Cheers.
Cheers, sweetheart. It's good to see you,
I
as
think
always.
we I think we meant it when we talked about, bring whatever you need to survive the holidays.
Yep, I got my cat, my holy sweater, and good old diluted warm booze.
Yes, which is great.
What you think?
I only drink champagne. I literally cheap champagne, right? Don't That's not an impressive thing. You say that before, like, oh my God, only champagne? How
Adi.
bougie. No, you can get like really good champagne for $10.
Hmm, I
Yeah.
just learned something. Uh,
And actually, one other thing I think, BJ, as we kick off to speak about alcohol, one of the data points that we gathered over the course of COVID, but we were very aware of it before, is unpaid caregivers have increased their use of substances to cope at 5 times the rate of the rest of the population. And
oh,
that's drugs and alcohol. There's another substance people use to cope called food, and 50% of us cope through food, right? So no judgment. There's no judgment. You
no,
do you, boo. You do what you need to do to survive.
right on, and get through the day. And acknowledging that some folks on the call probably can't do this, but go somewhere else. We hear you too. It's not about the booze, of course, but it is about coping, especially during the holidays.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, should we, before we go any further, sweetheart, should we raise a glass to folks? Our talk today, guys, is going to be about caregiving as an active thing, but I'm sure a lot of us on this call have lost folks for whom we've been a caregiver or whom we've just loved. So before we dig into this sort of active thing, ongoing thing, maybe we should cheers the past a little bit and its presence. Cheers. Hmm.
There was actually a beautiful question that came in advance of somebody who has lost somebody. And I know many of us have. We lost my mom-in-law in March. And if anyone wants to take a candle, there's a tradition if you leave a candle in a window over the holidays, it is to invite in all the souls of your loved ones who are gone,
Hmm.
right? And talk about them as a reminder to talk about them so we can keep them alive, at least in our hearts forever.
Right on. Beautiful.
So, BJ, one of the things that you and I talked about in preparation for this, I'm Alex Drane.
Yeah, wait,
BJ,
can I just, yeah, sorry. Alex Drane, guys, I don't know, some of you guys on the call are going to be from the Mettle world, some from the Archangel world, some from who knows. But let me just say, Alex, you and I have known each other for I don't know how long, a dozen years, I don't know, a while. We came together around this sort of subject matter, but it's just very nice to be with you. I actually love you. I actually really feel very close to you. And it's fun to watch our two little organizations try to spring into action too. And I just want to, but anyway, guys, from the Mettle side, this is Alex Drane, my dear friend. And like, I don't know anyone else like you, sweetheart. You are a whirlwind. You are hilarious. You are so outrageously competent and you get stuff done and you manage to like be beautiful along the way, inside and out. And I just really, really love you. And I'm really glad to share this little space with you.
yeah. And I'd love to say from the Archangel side, for anyone who doesn't know BJ Miller, but there is nobody who does not know BJ Miller. And I think about the work that has really the philosophies that have really shaped the work that I've done through the years, and this notion of we're not talking about end of life, we're not talking about advanced illness, we're talking about how to live our very, very best days with all their complexities. And BJ, I think the raw authenticity, the humility, the vulnerability, and the frickin' expertise and intellect that you bring gives a safe space for anyone from a CFO who's looking for like, I need credibility so I can know that this is a valid thing to invest in, to humans who are out there like, I don't even know what the term caregiver means, to feel seen and heard and supported. Because that really is the depth and breadth. And I think one of the things that you and I spoke about and thinking about doing this, which we decided to do a week ago, shout out to Sonia and the Archangels team for like supporting this, Sonia and Mettle team and the Archangels team. And I hope we have many more discussions like that because the notion is Archangels really often starts with data. And then we use that data as an excuse for people to feel safe in sharing their stories. And you can explain better than I can. You're at the other end of the spectrum, but together I think we cross that spectrum.
I think that's right on. I mean, I'm looking for any excuse to work with you, but this marriage, just as you described, between our work is, I think, kind of perfect. You help us understand what we're going through, And then Mettle kind of helps people deal with those facts in some way and live forward. So anyway, beautiful. Thank you.
Well, so let's dive in, because what everybody who's joining us say, thank you. And again, shout out to your loved ones and to you. And we're going to ask you to listen today with a couple different ears. Listen as somebody who can make a difference in other people's lives and whatever role you're playing. But first, listen for yourself, right? We're such big believers. Put your own air mask on before helping others. So everybody, let's really think about our own role as caregiver. And to kick that off, BJ and I wanted to share a couple of slides, a couple of these data points, but I'm going to start actually even before that with a story. And BJ, if you can't see me or if something gets lost, just stop me. So is my screen showing?
Yep, but it's showing. Is there a way to change the view so it's just the slides? There you go. Perfect.
Yes, I think I did that now. Is that good? Okay. Melting down under the mistletoe, caregiving relationships, holidays, ho, ho, holy. I won't say it. So to this point about stories, BJ and I had an hysterical conversation. We were talking about the prep, and BJ was explaining to me all the reasons why he's not really in a caregiving situation, as he went on to explain that he is exactly in a caregiving situation, not the least of which is the role he plays to mental health and as an individual and as a soul for many of us, which is he is our caregiver as we go through things that we would have thought were unsurvivable, and he helps make them survivable. And he does that in a very, very beautiful way for so many of us, increasingly in a scaled way. And I was reflecting on that and thinking about my own situation as a caregiver, which has a couple situations right now that are flaring, but one that is not. And I don't think of myself as a caregiver when I think about my dad. That's my dad. Shout out to my dad. We call him Dougie D. And he lives in Austin, Texas, and I live in Boston, Mass. And every single night at about 8:30, I get this nagging feeling in my head. What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Oh yeah, I got to call my dad and tell him to go to bed. And so I FaceTime him the first time, and I'm like, okay, Papa, it's time for you to go to bed. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. No, I'm watching TV. It's this great show. It's called The News. I'm like, Daddy, don't watch the news. Long conversation. Finally convinced him, going to go to bed. Panic for the next 10 minutes because I know he's walking up those stairs to get into bed. Call him back, get him on the phone. He waves to me as he's going to bed, and then we have our final thing every single night, which is I sing. He turns off the light, and I sing him a lullaby. And I sing him the lullaby that he sang to me when I was growing up, and that he sang to me actually a couple times as a teenager, a couple times when I was freaking out as a 20-year-old, 30-year-old. Great honor as a 50-year-old now to be able to sing to him. So I say that because as you're listening, you might be thinking that if you're not currently living with somebody who's going through a pretty serious illness, that you're not a caregiver. That's not true. You are. And actually, a huge percentage of us were even before COVID. So if you look at that percentage of adults in the US right now who are serving in the role of caregiver, it's 21% before COVID. So what is it as of COVID? What percent of adults in the US right now as of COVID are now serving in this role as caregiver, which is anything from, of course, the obvious ones. Someone's living with you, you're taking someone to the doctor, you're picking up the prescriptions, but it could be just calling to see if somebody's okay. It could be delivering groceries. It could be just sitting with somebody for an hour a week, checking to make sure that someone else has sat with them. The percentage of adults in the US right now who are doing that is actually 43%. So close to 1 in 2 of us in the US now are in that role. We've been part of a lot of studies published in the last year. These are 4 of them, 3 published by the CDC. So the data that you're looking at is legit. This is hardcore, published by the CDC in cooperation with the COPA initiative using Archangel's data. And of the 43% of us who are in this role, let this number, imprint itself in your soul for a second. 70% of us are experiencing at least one significant mental health, at least one, anxiety, depression, or suicidal ideation. And some of us are getting it from both sides. So if, I'm living in dread of my kids coming home right now and bursting in here because I forgot to threaten them with all sorts of terrible things if they didn't realize I was on a webinar. So 23% of adults in the US right now are actually sandwich generation caregivers. I would say maybe they're club sandwich generation caregivers. Maybe they're club sandwich, right? The definition means you're caring for someone younger at the same time that you're caring for someone older. And we know in certain communities, you might have 4 generations living in a household, and who's caring for who could change on a moment's notice. You could be a caregiver and a caregiver recipient caregivee at the same time. 85% of us in that sandwich generation role, 85% of us are dealing with anxiety, depression, and or suicidal ideation. So what is suicidal ideation? Let me just set the table quickly. Suicidal ideation sounds like a weird clinical word. It is. At its core, it's the idea that you have thought about, you've actively considered suicide in the last 30 days. That is the definition of suicidal ideation that's behind the data from our study that I'm sharing with you right now. So everyone get your geek on for a moment. We're going to split the US population into four different segments, 4 cohorts. And the first, and we're going to talk about this as it relates to what percentage of the population has thought about suicide in the last 30 days as of COVID. Cohort 1, these are individuals who do not have any caregiver responsibilities at all. And remember, I'm talking about unpaid caregivers. So if you're thinking of a paid caregiver, it's a doctor or a nurse or a tech, frontline worker, no, we're talking about unpaid caregivers, just exactly what BJ described. Cohort 1, 4.5% of the population right now across the US who don't have any caregiving responsibilities have thought about suicide actively in the last 30 days. It doubles if you say, okay, what if you're serving as a parent or a guardian to someone or people who are under the age of 18? It doubles to 9%. What if you're serving in a role as caregiver to someone or people who are over the age of 18? That's cohort 3, and that's 10%. But now let's come back to the sandwich generation population. Again, with the reminder, 43% of adults in the US are in this role in one way or another. 23% are getting it from both sides, from all over. Forget a side, like all across you. Take a second and write down on a piece of paper, what percentage of that population do you think has had suicidal ideation in the last 3 days? Write it down, cover it up, and I'm going to unveil, it's 52%.
Oh.
And 52%. And yeah, and we were interviewed about this by an extraordinary person at one point during this whole process. Then he said, oh my gosh, Alex, how do you feel about that data? I said, I think it's horrifying and heartening. And he said, how can you possibly say that 52% of these adults in the US are having serious, how is that heartening? And I said, because if you've been in this role, this has been true for you. You just thought you were the only one. And to know that you are actually not alone in this, that is actually the beginning of treatment, of care, of reducing that anxiety, that risk of depression or suicidal ideation, just by knowing you're not alone in it. In fact, if you walk into a room of all sandwich generation caregivers, it's more normal than not that people in there have had those thoughts. You are not alone, right? In and of itself, that begins to make us feel better. So for anyone who's listening for yourself or listening for others or both, as most of us are, so good to know we are amongst friends, right? These feelings that we have of feeling out of control. So the first step in feeling better is to feel supported. And our data shows in an extraordinary way that those of us who feel supported, when we feel supported, it measurably, sustainably reduces that risk of adverse mental health symptoms, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, the list goes on. And in technical terms, we think of that as lower odds of adverse mental health symptoms. In human terms, just better mental health, right? Better life is probably what we probably should have stuck on there. And so part of what we want to talk about today is get this data out there. Remember that data allows our brain permission to believe something that we've been like, what? There's no way. 52%, oh my God, that's the data says that, CDC published. But it's the stories that really engage the heart. And the stories are where behavior change happens. And part of that behavior change is making sure people know they're not alone, beginning to help this conversation across the US happen, and to let people know that there are resources that exist to support them. So we're going to have a fun exercise together right now. We've developed a tool over the last 20 years that is really takes 2 minutes to do. It's called the Caregiver Intensity Index, and it's been described as anything from, and Sonia, if you would not mind sticking in the chat, it's a 2-minute therapy session. Somebody described it, and I love this as a 50-year-old woman. Felt like a Cosmo quiz. Of course it does. Someone said, many people have said to us, like, well, I'm not a caregiver, it's not relevant to me. And by the end, they're like, oh, this just happened yesterday. This woman was like, yeah, I don't know. And by the end, she's like, I'm in the red. I can't believe it. I just forwarded this to my mother. She's going to be in the red as well. So let's all do this together at the same time. I'm going to click on this, and BJ, you're going to take yours at the same time, if you don't mind, because as we discussed, you are a caregiver in more ways than you necessarily think about. And I'm going to take it as I think about a particular caregiver situation that I'm part of right now that might be a story. And can BJ, does everyone see that link? Because I'm looking at a weird screen right now, but did the link go out in the chat?
The
Yeah,
link
the link,
in the
yeah,
chat.
it went out in the chat.
Awesome. And if you didn't see it in the chat,
yeah, if anyone doesn't see it, please just write in a question. I'll send it to you directly.
Yeah.
By the way, that's God talking. We call her Sonia. If you guys haven't, some of you guys haven't met her. that's
Sonia's awesome.
Very sweet. Thank you.
So the situation that I'm describing as I go through this index, and each of you think of the situation or multiple situations that you're thinking about as you go through it, and you answer for yourself at the same time, is a caregiving situation that I'm in that is new, is a flare, and it represents a situation where the person that that I'm caring for actually was being cared for by somebody else, and that person got COVID. And we had no idea the lack of community that existed around this person that I love and that is very, very important to me. And so when the person who was caring for them went away, they were basically left exposed to the elements. And you can imagine the impact that that's had right now in general, COVID, but also during the holidays, a time that there's so much stuff going on. So the first question is, are you caring for a relative or friend who is 18 years or older? Any care counts. As you're answering, look at the detail there. This is not, again, like this is anything. Personally, it's household chores, healthcare tasks, managing money, taking them to a doctor's appointment, arranging for outside services. Am I doing that? Calling regularly, visiting, see how they're doing. Yes, I am. What about someone under the age of 18? So schoolwork, helping with schoolwork, helping with arranging for outside services. Yes, I am doing that. The situation where the person or people I provide care for can be unpredictable or unstable. If this had been, this changes all the time. Take this multiple times. If I had taken this 3 weeks ago, I would have said, or 2 weeks ago even, like pretty stable. I would now say this is incredibly unpredictable. And I really do not know what to expect in my caregiving situation. So it is hard to plan ahead. So I'll say strongly agree there. I'm very lucky. I have not had to leave my job or take a leave, nor has my man. So I have not had to cut down on my own expenses because I help pay for things for the person or people I care for. But I am part of a broader family unit, and this absolutely has an impact on people's financial health overall. So I'll say agree to that. This is a big one, and I'm sure for many of you it is. Our family has disagreements about people not doing enough to help. Yes, and coming out of Thanksgiving and all the different ways that care happens or doesn't happen, and people help or don't happen or don't help, that this is really flared. Our family has disagreements with people not spending enough time with the person or people I'm providing care to. For me, I'm going to say strongly agree. I feel underprepared for most situations. That is true for me right now. This particular situation has some extenuating factors, not only not being local, but coming back to that, alcohol and other substances that people use to cope. And me personally not being as well versed in how to remotely be assisting in situations like that. Always feel I should be doing more than I am. Always. And that's part of the purpose. That's part of the resiliency. I'm not going to say I have more to do as a caregiver than I can handle, because I am incredibly supported by friends, neighbors, or family. Like, that is really lucky. And each of you, as you're listening to this today, be thinking about these questions and the impact they have on you and what we need to be reinforcing for ourselves. I can't wait to brainstorm with you about that, BJ, how you do it, how you help people do it. I do have someone I can turn to for support when things are difficult. Absolutely. But this is so funny. I have worked in healthcare for 25 years. I have no freaking idea. So incompetent in navigating the health insurance benefits of the person or people I'm providing care for. When we lost my mom-in-law in March, we're still digging out of the financial situation. I do not know how to manage the financial situation of the person or people I'm providing care for. But I do feel that I'm doing a good thing. There's that purpose component that can change by really strongly by culture, actually, whether you get the benefit of feeling purpose as opposed to it's a duty. I think I'm learning to effectively cope, so I'll just give myself middle of the road there. I think I'm becoming more confident in my ability to handle those things. Absolutely has limited my ability to spend time doing things I take pleasure in. I was going through this yesterday with a group of folks and doing it with a professional friend. And we were laughing how we haven't seen each other, not because of COVID, but because of this. Don't have as much personal freedom as I would like. I am very lucky I do not feel depressed, but I feel incredibly, incredibly stressed out. I do sometimes feel manipulated in my caregiver situation. I do sometimes feel resentment, absolutely. Again, working full-time for pay, I have missed more work than normal. I'm very lucky because my job, you guys are my job, right? This is my job. So I have not been less productive at work because I'm so lucky that what I get to do is think about this and reflect on my own situation. And you guys are my, BJ, you help me survive on a regular basis. So when I'm talking to you right now as part of the workday, how lucky am I? And my employer does give me flexibility. That's incredibly important to how resilient we are, how intense our situation is. And I do get help in my job as a caregiver. So I'm done. I want my score. Doing nothing probably feels like a break, and we're guessing you could use one. All right, so my score, 63. I am in the yellow. 66% of us are in the yellow right now. And as you scroll down, what you're going to see on the left are the things that could make everything feel more intense. We call these your drivers. These are the drivers of your intensity. The things that are making things more intense for me: no time for me, navigating money and benefits for others. But things that are making everything feel less intense. So I want to do stuff to offset the stuff on the left. I want to do things to get more of the stuff on the right, feeling like I have someone in the corner, feeling supported at work. So let's double down on those and do everything we can to get support in the others. So if I kept scrolling down, I could help someone else get their score. I could click through to resources. Each of you do that later. And resources exist in many forms for people. If you just go to Archangel's site, I'll just touch on this really quickly because one of the questions that we had asked was also about military and our beautiful veterans. So if you scroll down on the Archangel's resources component, you'll come down, there's a state that would load there, but it's not loading. Resources by buffers, and it also will show you resources for veterans in particular. So I'm gonna pop back over here, there it is. I'm gonna pop back over here and just close this out by giving some instructions to ask questions. In fact, voice of God, can you please, while I stop sharing my screen, can you explain how folks can ask a question?
Yes, absolutely. So if you've attended one of these before, this will be repeat for you, but for everybody else, once these two are kind of done with their chat, we'll open it up to everybody for Q&A. And there's two ways you can do this. You can raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. Or if you'd prefer to not do that, you can just type your question into the question area and I will read it out loud for Alex and BJ to address. And to go with the theme of safe space and wanting everyone to feel comfortable, if you would prefer to remain anonymous, that is also absolutely fine. Just let us know in the questions and we won't read out your name. So again, two ways: you can raise your hand and ask it out loud, or you can type it in and we will read it out loud for you. Thanks.
Thank you, Sonia. Oof, sweetheart. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of fascinating. My score, by the way, was 59, so I'm right there with you in the yellow. I mean, but there's something, like I harken back to what you were saying at the start of this when you and I were talking, and I wonder how many people in this call, like you're saying, this is much our job in so many ways, our profession, and still, when you and I were talking, I didn't register my stresses as those of a caregiver. And if I'm doing that, I got to believe a lot of people are doing that. And so I wonder, that data that you guys have put together, I wonder how, it probably underrepresents the truth would be my guess, which is further stunning. But yeah, for me, it's a lot of, it has to do, like my stuff is related to my working with caregiving for my mom, who's been disabled. A lot of us who've been on our panels will know that story. But since I was a kid, mom had polio, and she's so I just thought I was just her kid doing what I do, just loving my mom. But truly, I mean, absolutely, I am in a caregiver role with her, always have been. And then there's all the people, like there's the professional work I do, which I'm kind of excluding in some way here. But then there's all the friends and family who reach out, who need something, who are an extremis at some point and know that this is the work that we do. And so they reach out, and that's a daily phenomenon. And that one, I don't know where that doesn't register in the rest of my life. And it's private. It's often just me and that person, and it comes up a lot. So I guess I'm saying all that to sort of contextualize my score, and just to kind of solidarity with everyone out there who doesn't quite feel comfortable owning this word caregiver. I'm with you, but we kind of have to. There's something like the work you do, Alex, in Archangels, like your point, normalizing, but really celebrating. I mean, I think I wonder if part of my hesitancy is if I'm embarrassed to be a caregiver or something like that. In fact, there's something we should be deeply, deeply proud of, you know? Do you get to feel that?
Yeah, I mean, the genesis of the name Archangels came about specifically because of that. There is such a stigma. There's confusion around the term. 50% of the US doesn't even know what the term means. They think it's a doctor, it's a nurse, it's a paid caregiver situation. And the other thing, to your point, it's not enough to destigmatize. It's not enough to normalize. We have to celebrate. Unpaid caregivers are rock stars. And so the term Archangels was designed, someone should be able to walk into a biker bar with the Archangels logo emblazoned on the back, right? And another person should walk up to them proud and be like, dude, you're an Archangel? Me too, right? How you doing? Right? These are like, you are fierce warrior angel. You're spreading your wings out around these people that you're caring for. And eventually, ultimately, with the work that we're both doing, I hope we'll get to a place where unpaid caregivers are seen, honored, supported, and supported in ways that are not just what we're talking about right now. I see you, I love you, but much greater investment in things like mental health that they can actually get to and get supported in, and in ways that the state or the government actually ultimately help pay for this work, because it is work. It's beautiful work. It's work.
Yeah, right on. And at some point, yeah, I think there's obviously concern. If we look at that data, it's like, geez Louise, caregiving is like a hazardous pursuit. I think we should also note, and we all probably, many of us feel this too, there's something to be proud of. But there's also just intrapersonally, I think you and I would both attest, yeah, it's hard as hell and it stretches us and it stresses us, but it also opens us, and there's a lot of beauty. So as we're going through some of the hazards, let's just make sure to note the benefits too, of feeling a sense of purpose, feeling connected, feeling part of something, feeling engaged, feeling like you're contributing to someone you care about, etc. So, and that kind of gets to the buffers, right? The buffers are a way to amplify the positive side of the ledger, you know. And I wonder, you guys have some data on relationships, right? Because this comes up at Mental Health a lot from our point of view of helping to support caregivers. One of the things that is we spend a lot of time is just helping people feel, like you said, not alone. That is so much of the salve, just right there, because it feels so isolating. And to realize it's not, it's actually the point of connection with so many others is a huge, huge point. But also, more specifically, whether it's veterans or any subgroup, I'm a member of the disabled community. And so it means something extra to me when I also know within my cohort, not just the human species or America or whatever, but in the cohort of people who share similar values and experiences, it's extra important. And I bet that plays out with, say, veterans or LGBTQ, or you name it, any other way that we have to divide the population. So that's another thing we end up doing, is helping people feel part of their community and bring their whole existence to that community, not to hide their caregiving, but to celebrate it within that group. That can be super, super powerful. So anyway, in this work of supporting each other, clearly this work has an impact on us as individuals and our relationships, everything that we're involved in. So don't you guys have some data on relationships, sweetheart?
Yeah, and I'm going to share it. Because again, when we think about, I mean, I know for me, when I look at the data, it helps me feel less like a failure, right? Because I often feel in my role, I'm not doing enough, and I'm frustrated sometimes because I do feel the glory of the role and look at my dad, could you be cuter? And then there are, situations where, I'm having a really, really, really hard time. And then I'm mad at myself for having felt like I had a really hard time. And I think the reason you and I talked about the exacerbating effect of the holidays, I'll tell a quick personal story and then I'll share the data. We had a Thanksgiving where a lot of people were in and out, a lot of stuff was going on. I have a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old, trying to be a good mama with all of the COVID complexities, and I full on picked a fight with my man, like full on. I'll own it, picked it. And the reason why it's important to have language and have this framework like green, yellow, or red is what he actually did was he said to me, Alex, I don't think you're mad at me. I think you're in the red, which of course made me madder. I was like, oh no, I am mad at you. Let's be clear. But I wasn't, right? And as I sort of calmed down, it was so gratifying. And I hear this a lot from people. Sometimes we misappropriate the stress that we feel because of this gorgeous responsibility we have that has this other side to it. It is a lot. It is intense. We took that word intensity very seriously. And we take that feeling and we misappropriate it to, I don't like my partner, right? I don't like you. Actually, if you're in the red, 52% of caregivers in the red right now say, I do not think my relationship is going to survive this. What I want to say to all of them is like, it might not be your relationship, right? Just be very clear. And BJ, no, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And one other data point, we asked, because I think in the same way that suicidal thoughts is sort of a manifestation of really feeling deeply stressed out, having serious mental health impact, relationships in many situations also rely on communing, right? So one of the questions that we asked was, a measure of intimacy. Are you having less sex because of your caregiving responsibilities? And before COVID, if you were in the green, to after COVID, if you were in the green means you're all right, like everything's all right. It basically stayed steady. About 15% over the last 18 months have said, 24 months, 15% in the green, yeah, it's impacting my sex life. But if you look at caregivers who are in the red, before COVID, it was 58%. I'm looking down because I'm looking at the data because I'm a dork, 58%. It's now at 75%. So not only is it more normal than not, you're extremely unusual if this is not happening to you. And the reason why I love sharing this data is because we make ourselves feel badly as caregivers that we're not doing everything well. How could you possibly do everything well, right? We're exhausted. That's okay. The work that you're doing is beautiful. Be careful with yourself. Be kind to yourself. If you have a friend who's going through this, maybe bring this topic up. Are you going through this as well? Say to your partner, by the way, I think you're super hot. Not right now because I'm mad at you, or you're not. But this is translating into things that we can read into that might actually be related to something else. And I'm sure you see this all the time.
Absolutely. And this is where there's a sweet handoff between our work of you kind of helping us understand the situation and us helping support people through the situation. But of course, they're intertwined because a lot of the work we do is what you're describing, is putting words to it, drilling down, asking, is that, a lot of the work we do is really reflecting with people. Is that true? Is that assumption? Is that story you're telling yourself? Is it actually true? That's kind of stuff, getting specific. Grief this comes up with grief all the time until you name grief, because it's such an odd, altering process. Unless you have a word for it, you just feel nuts, and you're really likely to actually spray that pain onto somebody else or misapply it, as you're describing, and that happens a lot. So another reason to kind of stop the hemorrhage, so we don't just spread the misery, is just to be aware of why we're feeling the way we do, and that itself is understanding itself is therapeutic, and that comes up a lot. A lot of the work we do is simply around naming these things, getting specific, checking it. Is that true? Is that real? And once people feel not alone, of course, once people can rest into, then they stop feeling. My phrase is a little crass, I'm sorry, but like stop feeling like shit for feeling like shit. Like it makes perfect sense to feel overwhelmed and like shit. But to feel bad for feeling bad is a sort of gratuitous rind of suffering that you do not deserve, and that only makes your job harder, only cuts you off from yourself and others, et cetera, et cetera. So that's lot of what we're trying to do is just help people understand what they're going through and feel not alone. But it's also to stop this, pull off this, scrape the shame bits off the top of it. That's a lot of the work too.
Yeah, no, I think that, so we call it double jeopardy. And
Mhm.
caregivers are really good at this. We're really good at, in an intense moment, in our head, like I say a lot of swears in my head all the time. It's how I keep from saying them out loud. So when I'm in an intense moment, you know, my kids are asking me to do something that a kind mother would be like, of course, I'd love to help you with that. And I know I should say that. Meanwhile, I'm stressed about this other situation. And so in my head, I'm like, my face is like, And then at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up and I think, you are the worst human alive. I cannot believe you felt that way, right? Double jeopardy. Like that's, I think you're so right to call that out. It's okay to have moments that are hard. Don't beat yourself up for the fact that they were hard. You know, one of the things I hope we get to, we talked about grief quickly, and for unpaid caregivers, there's a people sometimes believe that when the person that you've cared for is gone, that your job is gone. Not only is your job gone, in many cases, the hardest part has begun. You are grieving, deeply, deeply grieving. COVID has manifested our ability to be together in this most carnal way, to grieve together. You're grieving, and then on top of that, you have all these tasks, the administrative tasks that you have to do to help settle out whatever the situation was. Close out bank accounts. Who knew that banks could, it could be so complicated? You could feel attacked by these places. You're just trying to do something good and honoring. And then on top of all that, in many cases, we've lost our purpose. And our purpose is protective in and of itself. My job was to care, to help care and love on Antonio's mama. And when we lost her, I lost that job. And he really lost that job. He talked to her 3 times a day. And what do you do with that 3 times a day, right? That's a big old hole. How do you deal with that hole? And so I think we have to be very sensitive as we think about caregivers and know that just because the person they're caring for is gone, actually the hardest part of that situation might just be beginning.
Yeah, you know, that's a big one. I often find when I try to find a reason to point out to people, even when they're in the throes of this feeling impossible and torturous and difficult, is to kind of just sweetly with a hug kind of rattle them a little bit. And, you know, as hard as this is, it's also, you're going to miss this time. There's going to be a moment where this person isn't here with you, and you're going to look back on it and wish to have this miserable, difficult moment back. Not as a way to like get a snap out of it, but a way to mark the moment and be aware, and also to set you up for the grief, even with this is torturous. And a lot of people, if they're honest in a caregiving situation, including when they're madly in love with the person who they're losing, there can be some real relief at the moment of death or at the moment of loss. There's no shame in that. That's very normal. Followed this sense of relief, followed by feeling guilty for feeling the sense of relief, and then feeling this empty hole of purposelessness, and then the self-recrimination for why didn't I delight in that sense of purpose while I had it, and I don't have it, and I'm even more miserable. So this sort of self-recrimination cycle is really intense, especially as caregivers when we're caring for somebody who is not curable. By some measure, they are going to get worse. They are going to decline, even if we're doing an exquisite job as a caregiver. So gauging success or failure, when do I get to feel good about this job I'm doing? It's really tricky when the person you're tempted to make the gauge of your own success or failure is in decline and they're only getting worse. So it's really tricky in the setting of advanced illness or chronic illness to find a way to feel, am I doing good or bad? I have no frigging idea. And part of this work is sort of becoming your own frame of reference and helping people understand it is an absolutely impossible test. It is an inexhaustible list. You will never, there will never be enough time. You will always want something more. So you don't get to this sense of completion. Oh, I did my thing and now I'm good. That is largely an illusion. So because you don't have these external gauges to say whether you're doing a good or bad job, it's kind of up to you. You kind of have to be that judge and jury for yourself. And that's really tricky for us humans, especially when we're kind of battered and unseen and miserable. And then because that begs the self-recrimination loop. So Anyway, this is a cycle we try to disrupt. It's very tricky. I don't know if does that make some sense to you as I'm talking?
I mean, and I hope people, it's so funny. I know this, but listening to you say it, I'm reminding myself again. Yeah, I know we wanted to open it up for questions, and as we're doing that, I wanted to share one other quick set of data, which is, you and I were talking about the technical term prevalence data. 43% of adults are in this role, 23% are sandwich generation, the impact on our mental health. I can tell you before COVID, 6% of the US was in the red. It's now 26% of us are in the red. Massive, massive, massive increase. The things that increase that intensity, those drivers, if you as an individual, your individual risk of having an adverse mental health impact, you have 3 times the chances of that if you're having caregiving related family disagreements. We talked about that. Resentment about caregiving responsibilities. You have 2, who doesn't? You have 2 times the odds if you feel underprepared, which is a point you were just getting at, right? Like, I don't know what's going to come next. I don't know how to prepare. I don't know how to plan. Not having such personal freedom as you'd like, or having had to cut down on expenses because of caregiving. For each individual, what increases your intensity will be different. But if you think of getting your intensity score as a conversation starter, as something you can do to have that conversation with yourself, have that conversation with a loved one, have that conversation with work, send it to a friend who you know is going through it, that gives you a way to start saying, this is the stuff I really need the most help on, right? Mm-hmm. Do we have something buried in our employer assistance program that can help me? Hey neighbor, can you help me? Hey BJ, this is how I'm feeling. Which you would have already known, and you guys would have already been helping them on, right? Like, may there be access to mental health so that people can get support in the gorgeous complexity and interwoven factors of this. I can't see what the questions are. Can you?
Well, this is where the voice of God comes back in to help us.
Okay, so we do have some questions that have come in while you guys have been chatting. So the first one, actually, Alex, gets back to a point you made earlier. This person said there are a ton of good men and women on active duty all over the world, and this is a real challenge for them. Do you have any advice I can share?
Yeah, one of the things we have a term we call double duty, a double duty caregiver, and a double duty caregiver has twice the risk of everything. And when you think about the caregivers of our nation, and the caregivers of our nation, is that like triple duty? I don't know how to describe the extent to which there is impact there. We did work, I did some work, and I spent a lot of time at Camp Lejeune. And I had this most extraordinary conversation with a decorated Marine. And we were sitting at his kitchen table, and it was the Marine, his woman, and this big fat baby. And he was explaining to me that this big fat delicious baby was a deployment baby. And he's like, you can count how many deployments somebody's had by how many babies they have. Because when you get back from deployment, there's only one thing you want to do. And he goes like this to his partner. And his partner said, yeah, but when you came back from that first time, you were really changed. And he said, well, it's really hard not to be changed when you are enmeshed, when you're walking around in the things that we walk around in and we see. And then he looked at me and he said, Alex, going to war is easy because all you have to worry about is dying. It's here that things are hard. I'm worried about my parents. I'm worried about my partner. I'm worried about our 4 children who were like running around like crazy people. I'm worried about my job. I'm worried about my ability to support my family. So I think for the military in particular, for so many reasons, sometimes you'll have a situation where someone's gone for an extended period of time, the extent to which community helps. So I think BJ, in talking about preparedness, we talk about having a red phone. And, if you're in the red, you need a red phone. And that red phone can take any number of things. First and foremost, it could be just a person that you're calling to admit you're having a really hard time. A red phone, you actually have a freaking red phone? Get out!
On my desk.
Oh my God, that is insane. That is so funny. We will come back to that. That is insane. So you need a red phone. BJ is a red phone for many people. But you need to know that resources exist. So I'm going to speak to the resources that we know about, and then BJ, maybe you could speak to the ones that you know about. If you go to archangels.me and you click on the menu on the part for caregivers and you scroll down, we have a whole section of things that are for vets families, for active military members. Because to BJ's point, while the things that drive intensity are universal across all populations, there are situations, subpopulations within that for whom these things will be more usual than not. So if you are caregiving for someone in the military, you're in the military yourself. If you are Black, if you are Latinx, Hispanic, if you are 18 to 24, if you are an essential worker, working over 60 hours a week, all of these things up the likelihood of you having intensity. All of these things make it that much more important that you feel seen, that we are celebrating the heck out of you, and that most importantly, these resources exist, how to find them, and if and when you have the time, that you actually can avail yourself of them. So go to archangels.me, and then BJ, I'd be super curious what your answer to that would be.
Yeah, well, so similarly at mentalhealth.com, we keep a list of resources. A book Sonia and I did together with Shoshana Berger, A Beginner's Guide to the End, has some resources listed in there too. But what we do most of the time in terms of working with a patient or a person and their family, whether they're a caregiver or a patient, a lot of the data-driven work around staying afloat has to do with sharing the load, sharing your experience of talking, processing with somebody. Sometimes it's helpful to have someone who's in the same circle you are. Sometimes it's actually helpful to have someone out. In some ways, it doesn't so much matter to whom you are speaking, but that you are speaking, to prevent some of the slide that the self-recrimination, the anguish points in on ourselves, and down we go in the shame spirals. So getting it out, up and out, articulating it somehow, we know that helps. That's what a lot of people come to us for. And on the other side, those of us interested in supporting caregivers, one of the real key things to do there is to listen generously, actively, not strategically or not trying to make a point, but genuinely dropping your agenda and really bearing witness, really seeing someone, really hearing someone. To the degree you can, drop the judgment. Bearing witness is a simple and gorgeous and actually pretty difficult thing to do. That's a big piece of this. So if you're wondering how to support caregivers, do that. The other thing that we know helps is some expression, some sort of contemplative, expressive thing, whether that's painting or making music or walking in the woods or yoga, doing something active with these things, with these feelings, with these thoughts, moving your body. We know these things help, staying engaged with them. A lot of people we work with who are artistic, we point them to work some of these feelings out through their artwork, and it becomes grist, and then you can create from them. Any way we can move someone from an overwhelmed place into a creative place it's a much more creative, curious place is a much more powerful or constructive or useful zone than is a fear or overwhelmed or self-blamey place. So those are the things that we know help. But last thing I would say, just in general terms, is, we're talking about the difficulties of caregiving, and in some ways we're talking about how to make it less difficult. As part of that, as you and I both, as everyone on this call will know, suffering sometimes leads us to all sorts of lessons and breakthroughs and awesome moments. So another thing for all of our sakes is to not just keep an eye out for where we can make all this less difficult, but where we can actually make it more wonderful, more amazing. So that can often mean with people just asking, where do you find in a day, even for a millisecond, that you feel okay, that you feel even good, that everything is the way it should be, things are in perspective for that moment, maybe time stands still for just a moment. What is going on when you're, name that place and people call attention to it, and then people can start building on that, what can otherwise feel like a subtle or throwaway moment or something that's beside the point. Yeah. So this is the way we can start being in touch where we can be expanded by this work, not just control the decline.
Yeah.
Those are some thoughts. But I know we have some more questions though, Alex. Should we cut to those, or are you going to say something else?
I was going to say one thing quickly, which is one of the other things I think is important to remember about the military, and we see this a lot with men in general, gross generalization, often the least likely to be comfortable with the term caregiver. We also see this with Latinx populations. Like, I'm not a caregiver, I'm a I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a man, I'm a neighbor, I'm a partner, whatever it might be. So just, again, this is why we use the term, you're an archangel, right? An aspirational term, but the idea of being careful with your language and seeing for someone else when they can't see for themselves when they're in this role. And I'll just add, caregivers never ask for help. So if you are supporting a caregiver, don't say, how can I help you? Just help them. Just put your body there. Fill their fridge, go and sit with their mom, whatever it might be, I think is a key way we can be supporting folks, no matter whether someone's deployed, caring for someone's deployed in any of these populations.
Right on. So beautiful. That was a really important point. The self-talk, the language we choose, so much flows from our word choice versus the other way around. And a lot of this is reframing. Like, for example, especially when I work with vets, is reframing strength as being completely related to vulnerability. Like, what's strong about someone who can't be moved? What's way stronger is if you can be moved and still find your way. That's strength. So a lot of reframing needs to happen here too. Anyway, gosh, we could keep going,
Voice of
but
God.
What's that, sweetheart?
Voice of God.
Oh yeah, voice of God, you're up.
Yes. Thank you. So actually, Alex, this question relates to what you were just talking about, like things you can just do for a caregiver who is taking care of someone. This person said, do you have any suggestions for how I can support someone else in a caregiving position? In this case, my mom, who's supporting my dad, who seems to be in the red. Particularly difficult for me since I do not live nearby and am limited in the direct support I can provide.
BJ, you want to take that first?
Well, I'll jump in and point us back to what I was saying a moment ago about this very powerful thing of bearing witness. So if I heard you right, the caller, the person was saying that, how do I care for mom who's caring for dad? Did I get that right, Sonia?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So making sure mom feels seen and heard, this very elemental, basic, let her express herself, let her be herself, and just hold that space with her. Don't run away. Don't judge it. Just hear her out. You don't have to pretend to have answers you don't have. There's really not much to it except for dropping your judgments. Do that. That's a big one. It may be pointing her to resources like we've already discussed, whether it's websites or readings or things like that. Pointing her to folks like us at Mental Health or a palliative care program, or therapists perhaps can be very helpful, of course. Also, just finding a way to support her logistically, whether that maybe is bringing her food or lightening her load in the way Alex is saying. You don't ask her, just do it, especially if you know the person well. Just do it. Don't wait for them to ask. So those are some basic ideas. Make sure she's getting exercise. Make sure she's getting outside. Tend to the fundamentals. We get in trouble when we blow past the fundamentals. Eat, sleep, breathe. Just check in on the basics routinely. And then keep an eye out with mom where she might still eke out some joy in that day, like we're saying. Mom, where do you feel okay? Is it, wherever that is. Hunt for that moment where she gets to feel okay and build on that. Those are some ideas.
Yeah, I love those. I think that point about saying, like, I see you. What you're doing is awesome. Thank you for what you're doing. And I would say write some of these statistics down that we just talked about. If you go to our site, you'll see all this data, and call her and be like, Mama, I just heard this data. I want you to know something. 43% of people are doing what you're doing now, and 70% of them have at least one, they've got anxiety or depression, or some of them are thinking about suicide. Mama, like, how are you? I see you. This is normal. Are you okay? Have her take her intensity index and do it with her on the phone. Say, what's your answer to this? What's your answer to this? And when you get to that piece at the end where it's like, here are the drivers of intensity, if you click through, you can go to her state, her zip code, and it will say resources that exist for her right then, right? So use that, do that with her live, send her to Mettle. And then I want to share one other thing. We call it outer circling. And I heard this term from Susanna Fox. We love you, Susanna.
Yeah, hello.
Over dating Susanna. So this is not her term, but someone else's. I'm forgetting whose term it is. But another visual, this helps me a lot when my caregiver intensity flares, is the person who is who is really dealing with that illness the most, the person at the center of the care circle. Think of them, they're in the center. And then there's a circle around them. In this circumstance, your dad's at the center, your mama's outside of him. She probably has moments that are hard, and she might get frustrated with him sometimes. He's not doing what she asked, whatever might be going on. Her job, the visual, if you can do it, is to do everything she can to picture herself as the outer circle, and her job as that outer circle is to pour love down on this person you're caring for. But because that can be hard, you need an outer circle. You are her outer circle. You need to tell her, Mama, I'm your red phone, I'm your outer circle. Because when she gets frustrated, she can turn around and we call it pour love in, dump crap out, right? She's gonna call you and be able to be like, I hate everybody, I hate everything, I am super frustrated. You feel like, that's okay, I hear you, that's normal, that's all right. But then you need an outer circle. So who's your red phone? Who's the person you're gonna call? Right? So you can be like, I am so frustrated because I talked to my mom about this already. And, you know, I told her she needed to do this and she's not doing it, right? Like, of course she's not doing it. All of us are imperfect. And then to BJ's point, finding and celebrating those moments of circling each other that are gorgeous and glorious, seeing those and celebrating them, I think is something that keeps me calm and helps me find beauty in the moments that I want to throw things against the wall.
Right on. You're reminding me of something really important that we haven't said explicitly. You just did, which is basically caregiving is not a one-way street. You cannot, that we have this idea in the health profession that's all over the place. It's a sure way to burn out. If we think, I don't need anything, I'm cool, just give. That just, mathematically, it can't work. You are a human being. That's part of your therapeutic effect, is being a real human, and the real humans need things too. So there's a caregiving, receiving loop that needs to happen if this is going to work well. So reminding mom or any of us, anybody else, that, you know, you got needs too, and that's not only is that permissible, that's beautiful, that's important, that's part of, you are a human being, and that's part of your therapeutic agency here. So okay, gosh, should we try one more voice of God?
Yeah, let's try one more. And I just want to do a quick note to people. If we were not able to get to you and you have your hand up, or you wrote in a question and we haven't been able to answer it, just know that we will record another little session to get your questions addressed. And if you're one of the people with your hand up, if you still have a question after this, please just email us at info@mettlehealth.com so we can get that answered for you. The next one here is advice on when and how to ask for help as a caregiver.
I'll just jump in sooner than you think. Probably, like, you know, quickly, depending on the situation. Back to caregiver, this is a team effort. This cannot be done alone, one way and another. So, you know, even proactively, you know, as a family member in particular, you can kind of look down the road and say, Mom, like to build on that last example, Mom, you're going to need help. If you don't need it now, you're going to. You start, you know, planning for it a little bit. Start, you know, asking around the community about home health aides if you can afford to hire help. The home health aides, personal care attendants, underappreciated workforce that can do beautiful, beautiful work. They can be hard to find. There are agencies, but start asking around before the need. When you're in crisis zone, it's a really tough time to cobble things together. So expect crisis zone is going to come if you are a caregiver over time. So plan for it. That's one big thought. Alex, what do you think, sweetheart? Anything to add to that?
Yes, I love that. So plus a Googleplex, what you just said. And then remember that letting someone help you is a gift for them. It's really hard when you're watching someone you love care for someone they love and you feel like you don't know what to do. So all of us in that role, just help, insert yourself, make them take the intensity index, look at what those drivers are, help them with those drivers. But if you're the person who wants that help, literally remind yourself, think back of a time in your life where you helped somebody and think about how you felt after. There's a reason it's called the helper's high. So utilize that. Like literally remember, you could be giving someone such a gift by having them, by giving them the great honor of supporting you. And then just to reiterate for what BJ said, have a plan. Have a plan, and where that plan was not comprehensive, we had a situation during COVID. We were prepped for COVID. My dad got COVID. We had a plan. I somehow forgot to plan that he might not get COVID. He might have like a serious health event. We thought he was having a heart attack. And I literally forgot everything. My brain cleared. I was like, oh my God, what do? I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And I had a red phone and I called the red phone. The red phone's like, you need to sit down. You need to breathe, right? So tell someone that they're a red phone. That's a way that you're going to help. Make a plan ahead of time, figure out what that is. Remember that letting someone else help you is a gift for them. And then I, again, use the tools, the caregiver intensity. It's a conversation starter, just an excuse to get this started. Someone can share it with their doctor, share it with a community health worker, can share it with an employer. Go to Mettle Health, look at the tips and tricks that are there, utilize their services. I mean, I think and then the last thing I'll say is think about those statistics, right? Like, this is real, this is serious. You cannot care for the person you're caring for if you are not healthy yourself. So the number one thing you need to do is take care of yourself. And then I lied. I actually have one other quick thought, which is for all caregivers out there, when things get hard, the person you're caring for, you might sometimes feel, and I'm sure you see this all the time, BJ, drawn to make a promise. I promise I won't put you in a home. I promise I'll be there with you at the end. I promise. You don't make promises. Let me say it differently. Make promises you can keep. I promise I love you. I promise I'll do everything I can. I promise I'll keep you safe. Right? Because keeping them safe might mean they can't be at home. So make that plan for that and just keep that in mind as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. In the interest of time, I'll just let's let Alex have the last word. And then, well, let's let the voice of God have the last word.
Voice of God, baby.
It's a lot of pressure to have the last word.
Just
part of being the voice of God. So for the people who've typed in a question, I think I've let each of you know, but just want to say this again. We'll do a little second recording to make sure that we answer your questions. And of course, thank you everyone so much for being here us on a Friday and joining us before the holidays. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. It's good to see you.
Thank you.